Yeah. I heard Ratchetpeoplemeet.com run 24 hours. That's perfect for me, you heard me? Cause I don't get tired. I'm up 24 hours. Yeah, retarded. I'm from Louisiana, the ratchet states. Disease is so bad out there, nigga. Be in the clinic, you heard me? Doctor come out, sir, we sorry to tell you got herpes, nigga. Yes, you hurt me. It could have been a lot worse, you heard me? We don't get tired, you heard me? Look, the first piece of boot I ever ate, I met the chick on ratchetpeoplemeet.com. It's nice, what, 3, 4 years in the making. I'm still, eating Buddha off Ratchet People. They supplying me with what I do, you heard me? I'm still eating Buddha off ratchetpeoplemeet.com. That's what I do, yeah. I mean, if you ain't got it like that, just, ratchetpeople.me, what the business is. Booty's there for you to eat on Ratchet People Meat. You know what I'm saying? One of them was kind of lit. I had to, stick my finger. Bitch, you wanted me to eat that, bitch? You know, pH levels off, that's what happened. You feel me? I had to let her know straight up. I don't, yeah, you smell a little raunchy, baby. You need to, take care of that, you heard me? And the original number is 1-800-RatchetPeopleMeet.com, but if you eat booty, your extension 121, you heard me, shout out to ratchetpeople.me, gave me my own little section, yeah, it's regular people and it's people that eat booty, you heard me? So, you dial that number, just hit that, your extended party is 121, you heard me? Come holler at your boy Gates, you heard me? It's all the way retarded. Yeah, what drew me to the site, you heard me, I seen this little chick on there, she was bent over, that's what I do. My appetite got riled up, you heard me? I seen the little chick bent over, I hit her up, on ratchetpeoplemeet.com. She came to see me, you heard me? We got it on, we did our thing, She left her life and never be the same. Yeah, what I do, yeah, what real niggas do. Like, I don't do the super big stupid booties, you heard me? You know what I'm saying? Cause no matter how they wash up, bro, it's still gonna be sweaty. You know what I'm saying? I ain't trying to get a beverage, with the booty in, you heard me? You know what I'm saying? Hold the sweat. You heard what I'm saying? So, I prefer something little nice petite, you know what I'm saying? That thing, they could keep that thing, all the way 100, keep that thing clean. So that's what I kind of do, the little petite. I could pick them up, you know what I'm saying? Spin them how I want to, you know what I'm saying? Open, I can grip them in, cause I ain't no little nigga, you heard me? I get them in a position, so they can't run. That's a tender spot. You heard what I'm saying? You get the, licking that, that's a tender little spot, it'll make them move. I put the, headlock on them and, around breakfast time, you heard me? That's when I deal with them Caucasians, you know what I'm saying? Early in the morning, I like that milk, go with my cereal, you heard me? Them booty loops, you heard me? I don't get tired, yeah, like around noon, you feel what I'm saying? Like that lunchtime, that's when I like that chocolate, and that's what I call chocolate on chocolate, you heard what I'm saying? Cause I eat booty, y'all will get that on the way home, chocolate on chocolate. You heard what I'm saying? But like, around, evening time, that late, that brunch, yeah, I like them tacos, you know what I'm saying? Yeah, you know what that meat look like, yeah, I do them Mexicans, my brunch, I holler at them, them senoritas, that's how we get down. Well, ratchetpeoplemeet.com, it's all the way retarded, I got my own section, you heard me, extension 121. When you hit ratchetpeoplemeet.com, dial that extension, get at your boy, and I don't get tired. RatchetPeopleMeet.com, open 24 hours, I keep that thing open 24 hours. Yeah, retarded, I don't get tired.